Okay, this is the last lesson for 7-8. We're going to take what we know, and now we're going to solve equations. So you're going to notice there's an equal sign with everything that we have remaining. So all that means is we're going to go ahead and get everything on one side, and then factor and do things as normal. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead first and subtract this 10x. Okay, on both sides, so that I can have 0 on one side. So my left side's going to read 2x cubed plus 8x squared minus 10x. That equals 0. Okay, so now I'm focused on this portion right here. So from here over, kind of ignoring that equals 0, I'm just going to factor this. And to factor it, I want to remember all my rules. So I look for a GCF first. I can factor a 2 out, and I can also factor an x out. So 2x times x squared is 2x cubed. 2x times 4x is 8x squared. And 2x times negative 5 is negative 10x. Okay, so we're doing great. Now we're going to see if this factors any further, and it may or may not. Now because this is a 1x squared, I can just kind of think through it. I know my first terms are x and x. I need two things that multiply to give me negative 5, but add to give me 4. The only factors of 5 are 1 and 5. If I make it a plus 5 and a minus 1, 5 and negative 1 multiply to give me negative 5 and add to give me a positive 4. Okay? All right, now for now, up till now we've been ignoring that equals 0. Here's where this comes into play. They want us to solve it, so that means they want an answer. They want to know what these values are. Oops. Okay, so bringing this up here, I'm going to take each term, and by term, what I'm referencing is 2x, x plus 5, and x minus 1. So I'm going to take each of them and set them equal to 0. So 2x equals 0, x plus 5 equals 0, and x minus 1 equals 0. All right, first one I'm going to solve, I divide by 2. 0 divided by anything is 0, so that's one answer. Okay, the next one, I'm going to subtract 5 on both sides. X equals negative 5. That's another answer. And lastly, I'm going to add 1 to both sides. X equals 1. That's my last answer. Okay, so if they ask me to solve it, these are the three things I would share. Now just again, to give you a bigger understanding of what this is, I already graphed it on Desmos, and look, first of all, it looks kind of unique. We'll talk about that later, but it crosses at negative 5, 0, and 1. And those are the solutions we just found. So technically that's what we're doing when we solve for these. Negative 5, 0, and 1. We're finding when the x value is equal, when the y value equals 0, what the x value is. Later we call it zeros, roots, things like that, x-intercepts. All right, I'd like to try a few more. 9, 10, and 11. I'm sorry that number 11 is not here, over there. So we'll work with that. But let's first do number 9. I'm kind of shifted over here. It's already all on one side, so I look for a GCF, and I can factor a 3 out. That's it. So 3 times x squared is 3x squared. 3 times negative 7x is negative 21x. And 3 times 10 is 30. That equals 0. Now I can go ahead and factor this one. This one's one that's not too hard, again, to factor in my head. I'm going to see what times what equals x squared, so x and x. What times what equals 10. Two things that multiply to give me 10 but add to give me negative 7. Well, my factors of 10 are 1 and 10, and 2 and 5. So if I make them both negative, negative 2, negative 5 multiplies to give me 10 and adds to give me negative 7. So those are my values. And now we're going to set each of these equal to 0. Okay, so 3 equal to 0, x minus 2 equal to 0, and x minus 5 equal to 0. Now 3, this time it's just a 3, not a 3x, so 3 doesn't equal 0, so that one's irrelevant. X minus 2 equals 0, I add 2 to both sides, and I get x equals 2. X minus 5 equals 0, I add 5 to both sides, and I get x equals 5. So my answers are 2 and 5. If you would go ahead and graph that on Desmos, you would see that's where it crosses the x-axis. Okay, number 10, this one right here, I'm going to factor out a GCF of 5. I have y squared minus y minus 6 equals 0. Again, it's convenient. Everything's all on one side. If it wasn't that way, that would be my job first, to get everything on one side, like we saw before. Anyways, though, 5 stays out here, and I can factor this. I'm going to go ahead and put y first. It's a bad y. There we go. Y and y. Factors of negative 6. 1 and 6, 2 and 3, they have to add to give me negative 1. Because when I do this, I'm looking at my new one. So if you're, oops, sorry. I'm not looking at, so I'm looking at this here. I'm not looking at what was originally in the problem, because I factored that 5 out. So that's why I'm working within this new problem. So, all right, so with that in mind, two things that multiply to give me negative 6 and add to give me negative 1. If I do plus 2 minus 3, 2 times negative 3 is negative 6, 2 plus negative 3 is negative 1. All right, set each equal to 0, 5 equal to 0, y plus 2 equal to 0, and y minus 3 equal to 0. All right, 5 equals 0 doesn't make sense, so that's gone. Here I subtract 2 on both sides, and I get y equals negative 2. Here I add 3 to both sides, and I get y equals 3. Okay, and those are my two answers there. All right, let's move on to the next one. Number 11, so I'm going to pull that up, actually, so we can see that a little bit more easily. And I'm just going to rewrite it over here. C to the 4th minus 81c squared equals 0. Okay, now this one only has 2 terms, so that might tip me off to something. Whenever I do this problem, I'm going to look and I'm going to see that I can factor out a c squared. Okay, so c squared times c squared is c to the 4th. C squared times negative 9 is, oh no, not 9, sorry, times 81. I got ahead of myself. C squared times 81 is 81c squared, so that's why I put the subtraction sign in there. So if I redistribute that, I get what's originally the problem. Now, I look at what's left in the parentheses and I say, can this go any further? And it can. That's a difference of 2 squares. So I'm going to have c squared, perfect square, c squared breaks into c and c, 81 breaks into 9 and 9, 1 is plus, 1 is minus. Sorry, this says c minus 9. Okay, so I'm going to set each of these terms equal to 0. C squared equals 0. C plus 9 equals 0. And then I'll put down here c minus 9 equals 0. So the first one, take the square root. I'm just left with c equals 0. That's one answer. Here I subtract 9 on both sides. I get c equals negative 9. That's another. And here I'm going to add 9 to both sides. Now I'm not showing that step mainly because there's not that much room, but that's what it looks like. So c equals 9 is my last answer. So I have 3 answers in this problem. Okay? Alrighty, let's move on to, we're going to skip example 4 because the numbers are just not conducive for what we need to do. We're just going to do this last one here, and that'll wrap up where we're at, okay? Alrighty, so here we have a box in the shape of a rectangular prism. It has a volume of 72 cubic feet. The box has a length of x feet, a width of x minus 1 feet, and a height of x plus 9 feet. Find the dimensions of the box. Okay, so again, if you had a box, you would just measure it. I understand that's not realistic, but there are very many realistic problems where you don't have the thing to look at, to work with, and you're coming up with like the maximum volume and things like that. Or I'm sure there's a gazillion other scenarios we could cite, but here's a scenario. So the entire volume is 72 cubic feet. They're giving us that this has a length of x feet, a width, so this here is x plus 1, it's this distance here, or x minus 1, sorry, x minus 1. Change that so we don't mess up. All right, so that's that distance. And then a height of x plus 9, okay? they want us to find what are those actual dimensions. Now you could maybe do some trial and error, but I want to practice the solution process because this is why we learned where we can apply everything we just did. So we know how to find volume. It's going to be length times width times height. And it's going to equal the volume, 72. So let's FOIL, multiply, distribute everything out here that we need to. I'm going to first go ahead and FOIL these. X squared plus 9x minus x minus 9. It's going to simplify to x squared plus 8x minus 9. All right, now don't forget we still have this x out here. So the next step is to distribute that x into each term. So I have x cubed plus 8x squared minus 9x. All right, now the next thing not to forget is that we still have this equals 72 over here. We can't go ahead and factor anything when we have stuff on both sides of our equation. So I'm going to subtract 72 on both sides. I'm going to write this one up here. So what I have left is now x cubed plus 8x squared minus 9x minus 72. And that all equals 0. Okay, now this is 4 terms. So always look for a GCF. I don't have one, but I can do some grouping. So I'm going to group these two like we did on that one problem. I'm going to make that plus, so it's a negative 9x minus 9x plus a negative 9x, same thing. So that just allows me to have that plus sign in the middle. Let's see if I can factor out in each common terms. From this set, I can pull out an x squared. So I'm left with x plus 8. It's about 8. I don't want anyone confused. Okay, x plus 8. From this term, I can factor out a negative 9. And I'm left with x plus 8. And whoo, we did it. We see a good thing. This is x plus 8, x plus 8. So just for more factoring practice, I'm going to factor out an x plus 8. And I write what's remaining then, what remains here, which is x squared and a minus 9. And that equals 0. Now we're so close to the end, except that this can be factored further. That's a difference of 2 squares. So x plus 8, then we have x minus 3, x plus 3. Or you could write x plus 3, x minus 3 equals 0. Okay, let's set each of these equal to 0. For the last portion, I'm going to say x plus 8 equals 0, x minus 3 equals 0, and x plus 3 equals 0. Okay, I'm going to subtract 8 on both sides. I get x equals negative 8. Here I'm going to add 3 to both sides. And I get x equals 3. And here I subtract 3 on both sides. And I get x equals negative 3. Now of my solutions, this one I don't just list everything because we actually have a word problem. These apply to dimensions. I can't have a negative dimension, so these two are out. Can't be negative 8 or negative 3, so my answer must be that x equals 3. This is a long problem. I'm very aware of that. I think there's only one of these on homework, and if you have questions, I will be happy to do it a gazillion times, but the process is the same, so if you just kind of take it slow through this step, it might help. But the last thing is they want us to find the dimensions of the box. So now that we know what our answer is, what x is, that means my dimensions are, it's going to be, if I redraw a box, just so I can write them in and not write over stuff, this is going to be 3 feet. This here is 3 minus 1. So this is 2 feet. And this here is 3 plus 9. This is going to be 12 feet. So my dimensions are 3 by 2 by 12. If I multiply 3 times 2 times 12, I get 72. And we did it. All right, great work, guys. That's the end of 7-8. Questions, obviously, feel free to ask. Okay, well done. You finished chapter 7. Proud of you. Thanks, guys. Bye.